Okay, here comes my big giant rant about plot twists. One of my favorite TV shows is the original run of The Twilight Zone. The name is synonymous with twist endings. There were 156 episodes. Not all of them were great. Quite a few were silly, some of them were just plain bad. But the episodes that are iconic because they worked. I'm going to walk you through an example of a well-done twist, but not from The Twilight Zone. I'm going to use Jordan Peele's Us as an example. I am going to spoil the whole thing. Us is a 2019 horror film that posits there is a mirror society to ours underground, populated by our doubles, our doppelgangers. In the film, they're called the Tethered. This has been going on, unknown to us, for God knows how long. And the Tethered have had enough. They're done being our shadows. They're ready to have their day in the sun, and they will untether themselves by any means necessary. Adelaide, played by Lupita Nyong'o, had a brief encounter with her Tethered as a child, and is the only one not surprised by the takeover. She and her family engage in a fight to defeat their Tethered and survive. Throughout the film, some odd things might start to add up for the viewer. It becomes apparent as we're introduced to them that none of the Tethered speak. Adelaide's Tethered, Red, is the only one who does.
Little girl, run!
That's an interesting coincidence, but the film doesn't really dwell on this. After that night in the House of Mirrors, Adelaide's parents took her to a doctor because she stopped talking. Well, traumatized children do that sometimes. The film psychologist says so. She obviously recovered. Adelaide does seem to know a lot about the Tethered.
We need to move and keep moving. We take the coast. We go to Mexico. They think like us. They know where we are. They won't stop until they kill us, or we kill them. They've been planning this. They have the upper hand. This is the time to run.
Again, the film moves on, but things stack up. Why has she been captured? Why don't they just kill her? We've seen that it's not an every Tethered must kill their own thing. Maybe because she's the double of the leader? And then in moments of bloodlust, she makes this sound? We were only shown brief moments of her encounter with her Tethered when she was a kid. Telling it to her husband, she keeps things vague. But at the very end, she flashes back to the whole story. She switched places. Adelaide was chained to the bed and left underground as a child. The adult Adelaide, the one we've known the whole movie, was the real Tethered. And she spent every day since looking over her shoulder, knowing that sooner or later, the real Adelaide would come after her to take back what was rightfully hers. And with that one final puzzle piece, all those weird things fall into place and you go, oh. Laid out like this, it is kind of heavily telegraphed, but it's a twist that holds up. It makes sense. It makes the rest of the movie better. The film never misled you. It just withheld one crucial piece of information from you, but it was still building to this ending the whole time. Poorly done plot twists are the ones that seem like they're lazy, done for shock value, tacked on without any regard for the story told before. They cheapen and weaken the narrative as a whole, and they drive me absolutely insane. But seeming to deliberately lead the audience in one direction before ultimately going a different route, you could call that something else, like subverting the audience's expectations. Well, let's talk about that. And no, I'm not going to be talking about The Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker, because I'm going to talk about the big one, the first one, the one that really, really worked.
No, I am your father.
Imagine with me, for a moment, looking at this with fresh eyes. Imagine you don't know this scene by heart or by cultural osmosis. Imagine this wasn't the dramatic linchpin that the rest of Star Wars would build itself around. Imagine this isn't one of the most iconic scenes in cinema history, for better or worse, and a whole generation of filmmakers will spend the rest of their careers trying to chase this high. Imagine you saw Star Wars, the first one, in theaters in 1977. And you were surprised and excited when you heard there'd be another movie to continue the story. And you went to the theater in 1980 and sat down for The Empire Strikes Back. And what was in those two movies was all you knew about Star Wars. In the first movie, we find Luke grew up believing his father was a navigator on a spice freighter. Boring. Okay, except for the part where spice is drugs in Star Wars.
Do you spice?
Uncle Owen literally told Luke his father was a drug runner. Iconic.
Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him.
That's what I'm afraid of.
It isn't until he meets Obi-Wan that he learns the truth. His father was a Jedi Knight who upheld peace and justice in the galaxy. A pupil of Obi-Wan's, Darth Vader, a former Jedi, helped the Empire hunt down and kill the Jedi. He betrayed and murdered Luke's father. After his aunt and uncle are killed, the knowledge of his father is key in convincing Luke to join Obi-Wan.
There's nothing for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
Luke might have tagged along for a while if he still believed his father was a no-good death stick salesman, but he is motivated to take an active stand against the Empire because of his father's fate. That's basically all we learn about Luke's dad in the first movie. In Empire, it doesn't come up for most of the movie. If we're viewing the trilogy as an extra-long 3-act structure, Empire is Act 2, and Act 2 is where you stack the odds against the heroes to make it seem like everything's hopeless, so the ultimate triumph means more in Act 3. Act 2 is where you make your heroes suffer, and that's what happens. The rebels lose the base on Hoth, Luke is separated from his friends, Han and Leia spend like 90% of the film trying to avoid capture. They think they're finally safe, but they get betrayed. Han gets frozen and shipped alive to a guy who wants him dead. Luke, who spent his 90% of the movie stranded in a swamp with a crazy anthropomorphic frog creature, heads straight to his friends when he realizes they're in trouble. And the frog puppet in a bathrobe and the tiny ghost of Obi-Wan are like, "Don't go, you're totally gonna die." And Luke's like, "No, it'll be fine. You will absolutely see me alive again." And they're both like, "Woof." And Luke gets there and it turns out this was an elaborate trap and it's not fine at all. It turns out his mentors were right. He's still just some cocky farm kid in over his head. He fails. He loses. And I'm sure more than a few moviegoers in 1980 were wondering, am I about to watch Luke Skywalker die? Dangling over an abyss without a weapon or a hand to wield it, failing to save his friends, failing to avenge his father, he listens as Darth Vader entices him to join him. Faced with certain death, Luke doesn't even consider it. Because again, he's propelled by the fate of his father.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
No. That's not true. That's impossible!
Search your feelings. You know it to be true. Luke.
Vader keeps talking, but Luke clearly stops listening at this point. After that initial moment of denial, Luke seems to accept this new truth. But more than a few moviegoers in 1980 were probably stuck in that "that's impossible" moment. Because this makes no sense. Searching one's feelings and ominous music aside, why would we believe Vader here? Probably more than a few moviegoers went into Return of the Jedi in 1983 believing, or hoping, that Vader would be proven wrong. Maybe Luke, the most gullible knight in the realm, would get new information and instantly believe that. But Vader, the bad guy, was the one telling the truth. Yoda tries to hurry up and die to avoid answering the question, but does ultimately confirm. When Obi-Wan's ghost shows back up, Luke is rightfully pissed.
Why didn't you tell me?
And Obi-Wan poorly tries to justify his gaslighting.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
No matter how many times I watch this, I will never not love how done Luke is with Obi-Wan here.
A certain point of view?
Like, if Obi-Wan still had physical form, he'd punch him in the face. So yeah, it's true. Obi-Wan lied before. Darth Vader is Luke's father. Still, Return of the Jedi could have explained it away. Imagine if Luke confronted Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan was like, no, Darth Vader is cunning and evil, and as such he is extremely talented at getting inside people's heads. He was totally trying to psychologically torture and manipulate you. He's still the guy who literally, and not metaphorically, killed your father. Now go and finish avenging him. They could have made this plausible either way, but the final version of the story is certainly not how it was conceived during the first movie, because, surprise, Star Wars has always been making shit up as it goes.
Leia's my sister.
I know. Somehow, I've always known.
As far as the story goes, up to the point he says it, Darth Vader being Luke's father comes out of nowhere. It makes no sense. At first glance, it seems like a cheap, lazy subversion of audience expectations, something done merely for shock value that could have easily been undone without lasting consequences in the next movie.
They sold you to protect you.
Stop talking!
Ugh. But here's the thing. They kept it because they recognized it worked thematically. I'm going to let Rian Johnson explain why, because it turns out that guy knows how stories work. It's the hardest possible thing that Luke, and hence the audience, could hear at that moment. You've had a bad guy that you can hate. He's evil. With that one line, I am your father, suddenly that easy answer gets taken away from you, and he's something that our protagonist has a relationship to. Not only have our protagonists spent the entire movie getting beaten into the dirt, in this last moment, when it seems it can't possibly get any worse, the villain drops a psychological and emotional bomb that destroys everything Luke thought he knew. He started this journey hoping to become a hero like his father. This revelation changes everything. There are no easy answers anymore. What does he do now? It's worth noting that in Return of the Jedi, after confirming Vader's identity, both Yoda and Obi-Wan are like, yeah, he's your dad, you still gotta kill him, and Luke says no. Really, Luke would have been justified if he had decided to still kill Vader. Vader's still a bad guy who's actively doing bad things. It seems like the easiest way to stop him for good is to kill him. And it's not like he was there for Luke at any point. It's not like Luke has fond memories of him. And if anything, killing Vader would still avenge the death of his father figures. But killing his father is what he was told Darth Vader did. And it turns out his dad is still alive. Not the person he expected him to be, but alive. If he's the one who kills him now, he is no better than Vader. He decides he's going to save him. This changes the story, from a straightforward save the day while getting revenge for patricide at the same time thing, which is satisfying in its own right.
Offer me everything I ask for. Anything you want. I want my father back, you son of a bitch.
But the original trilogy is as long as 3.8 Princess Brides. The revelation that Vader is Luke's father breaks things up. It keeps it from getting boring. It changes the motivations of and dynamics between the characters. But more importantly, from a place of character growth, Luke's new goal of bringing his father back to the light is more in line with being a hero. He learns from his failure in the cave. He doesn't give in to his anger. He's learned from his father's mistakes. He can be the hero he imagined he was. And it means more than it would have, because it turns out being a hero is harder and more complicated than a naive farm kid ever could have imagined.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
And it comes full circle. So what might seem at first glance like a last-minute subversion of audience expectations works, not just because it's exciting and it changes things. It's because it keeps with and further develops the overall themes of the story. The filmmakers recognized that and committed to it and made it work. Subverting expectations is not automatically a bad thing, but it still needs to be earned. It needs to be followed through. It still needs to make some kind of sense, even if it resonates emotionally and not logically.
They sold you to protect you.
Stop talking!
Any kind of plot twist needs to strengthen the story you thought you were being told by changing it.